By the way, the Eagles had the day off today, so no day 8 camp notes yet. But Jonathan Cyprien is in the house. We'll get John's take on that as he wrote about it at 97.3 ESPN. And who could be the Eagles' toughest opponent this season? We'll have that for you here in Football at 4. But Jonathan Cyprien is in, and he's an interesting guy. I mean, he was a highly sought-after safety a couple of years ago. He went to Tennessee, then tore the ACL. Thought to be one of the best run-stopping safeties in the game. So why is Philadelphia bringing him in?
Well, we'll have to see when we talk to Jim Schwartz, and I think it's going to be interesting. I think we might have sort of a Mark Barron situation developing. That's my early take on the situation. I think you're looking at a hybrid player. We see the NFL constantly changing. A lot of teams are looking for that sort of safety / linebacker who can play in the nickel. And Jim Schwartz seems to be going to more big nickel recently, certainly in practice and in games where he's had 3 safeties on the field. Here, if it works out, you have a guy who weighs about 225.
Right, yeah. I actually brought that up earlier, John, I wonder if the Eagles are going to look at him and maybe to pair him up with Bradham.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I don't know. I mean, Camus Grugier-Hill's having a good camp, so I think it's more of a depth move. I don't think they're looking at this as a starter, at least short term. But to have a player like that and maybe develop them and can do different things, what he can't do is play single high safety. So a lot of people are speculating they're not happy with Andrew Sendeo. That's not the case. They're very happy. He's the single high third safety. Playing with the first team as Rodney McLeod, works his way back. Jonathan Cyprien is not that. He's strictly a box safety, and as I said, he's big enough to where you can see him fitting into that Mark Barron-like role, who used to be a safety, is now a linebacker. And a lot of teams are looking for that type of player. I think that's what the Eagles are trying to do, and we'll see if it works. They're rolling the dice. I mean, the guy's played 10 games over the past 2 years, so he's had a lot of injury problems, but he's once the 33rd pick in the draft, so he has significant talent. They worked him out in June. They obviously feel he's healthy enough to get in practice. Now, it still hasn't been officially announced, but I do think, the Eagles just made another roster move. They signed a tight end, Alex Ellis, and they waived rookie linebacker Joey Alfieri. Originally, I heard they were going to waive Alfieri for Jonathan Cyprien. So that might indicate they're waiving a linebacker to put him at linebacker. And we'll see, maybe they waive another tight end to make room when Cyprien is officially announced. But yeah, I think they're signing him as a hybrid player.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I kind of surmised when I saw it too, was, I see 6 feet, 223. I mean, he's bigger than Nate Geary is, right? I mean, so he would be a guy that you would think could be, because he was a very good, I don't say shouldn't say is, he was a very good run-stopping safety. I mean, he got himself a pretty big deal with the Titans, but then he tore his ACL.
Yeah, he was a pretty good player in Jacksonville, but it was as a box safety, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you look at the role of what Jim Schwartz had Corey Graham in as his third safety, that was more of a center field role, and that was more of a coverage role. So this is not the type of player that would be in the mix for that. So just because you see safety next to the name doesn't mean all safeties are interchangeable. And I do think the fact that Alfieri was waived and not one of the safeties, one of the deeper end safeties, kind of tells you, or at least highlights, potentially they're going to look at him more as a glorified linebacker.
That should be interesting to keep an eye. Now, when is the practice is at Lincoln Financial Field? When's that? Tomorrow or Sunday?
Sunday. Sunday night.
So tomorrow, anything?
Yeah, tomorrow practice at NovaCare, typical morning practice, and then Sunday the lone open practice at Lincoln Financial Field. If you got $10,
if you got $10,
you got to pay to get in.
Yes.
So the Eagles have gotten a lot of criticism for that, and I think rightfully so.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen around the league a lot of teams, the Cleveland, Cincinnati. I mean, some teams have up to 10, I think, open practices. It's almost routine that their practices are open almost every day.
Yeah.
What is
that? I think the most was 19.
Slominski's come out and kind of tried to explain what is their reasoning why they don't feel letting the public in is a good move.
Well, it's a lot of convoluted stuff. They often talk about the neighbors in South Philadelphia, and they don't want noise at the NovaCare complex. So that's part of it. Another part is there's only one field, obviously, at Lincoln Financial Field as opposed to 3 at the NovaCare complex, so you can't do as much work. When you're doing individual and small drills and one-on-ones, you can use all 3 fields. There's just not enough room at Lincoln Financial Field. So that's an explanation. But the real reason is they don't want people down there. So, I mean, that's the reason. And look, it's understandable. I mean, there are fans there every day, but they're season ticket holders and people like that, and sponsors and marketing partners, and they get to invite their friends down. So there are a number of fans at every training camp practice, but the average fan can't get in. And that's a lot different. And the Eagles don't seem to be concerned about it, to be quite honest.
Well, they'll have it on Sunday night, and it's your one chance to go watch them over at Lincoln Financial Field. You wrote today about the biggest opponent for the toughest opponent for the Eagles this year. Quite frankly, could be complacency, and this is a team. This is a team that made the playoffs last year, a year after going to the Super Bowl. So explain how complacency plays a role here.
Well, they're getting a lot of accolades in the off season, in the preseason, when games aren't being played, and everyone's talking about this team like it's a significant Super Bowl contender, which I think they are on paper from a talent perspective. But you can imagine, and I use Pro Football Focus because one of the CBS 3 guys that were down there the other day asked Doug Peterson the question about they've rated them as having the best offensive line in football, the best pass rush in football, the best receiving corps in football, all of this. And believe me, this seeps into the players' minds. And when you start from a coach's perspective and these guys are getting told how great they are every single day, you can imagine that's a hurdle. It's a nice hurdle to have. You'd rather have that hurdle than not have players, talented players. But I do think there is expectations for this team that are off the charts.
Yeah.
And I think if they win, and I wrote this as an example, and you can ask the text, put it on the text board, Mike, and ask whoever you want. If this team wins 12 games and loses in the divisional round, I think the majority of people would consider that a failure. And that's absurd.
Well, would you say that this
team
type of season? Would you say that this team has that 04 feel to it when they got T.O.?
I think this is a better team than that team on paper, up and down. I mean, this team is, I've said from the start, top 5 roster in the NFL. They are very deep. They have stars on both sides of the football. Yeah, I mean, I think they're better than that group on paper, potentially. But that's what I'm talking about, and that's why the expectations are so high. And everybody knows they're high. Doug knows they're high. He realizes everybody expects this team to go a very, very long way. And so you can imagine if they don't reach the Super Bowl and if they don't win the Super Bowl, there are going to be a significant amount of people disappointed. And it's hard to win in this league. No matter how many good players you need, a lot of things got to go right. A lot of things got to go right to make a Super Bowl, to win a Super Bowl. You saw how long it took the Eagles to do it. There's no question, if you look at that team, that Super Bowl team, this team is deeper. This team has more good players than that team did.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean they're going to win the Super Bowl. And I look at the Phillies, and people forget, if you look at the Chase Utley, Ryan Howard, Jimmy Rollins Phillies, there were at least two teams that didn't win the World Series that were better than the team that won the World Series. Easily.
Yeah.
And I don't think enough people understand how difficult it is.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of people would surmise that the 09, 10, and 11 team were all better than the 08 team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's no question, at least two of them. The team that lost in the World Series was much better than the team that won. But, I mean, sometimes it's about opponent. Sometimes the ball goes the wrong way. You get a bad break, and only one team is standing at the end.
Yeah.
So, but from a standpoint of complacency, it's just natural. If everybody tells you how great you are, you start believing it.
Right. And I mean,
So
I guess that's where, and you wrote about it, and you have it pinned to the top of your page about Doug Peterson comes in, is he needs to make sure that these guys don't allow that to kind of seep in. It's something that Andy had to deal with year after year. So you would think that Doug is equipped for, he was around all those teams, Andy during those times.
Yeah, and I use Andy as an example today.
By the way, isn't it amazing that all these years after Andy, we still reference him so often when it comes to this team?
Well, because he meant so much to this organization. There's a whole generation of fans that grew up and lived through the Andy Reid regime and don't understand how bad this organization was for a very, very long time. And everything changed. And Jeffrey Lurie deserves plenty of credit, too, as the owner. But Andy Reid, from a football standpoint, kind of put his DNA in this organization. And his belief was you stack good decisions and good things will happen.
Right.
And when you're in the mix year after year after year and you're consistent, at some point it's going to break for you and you're going to win one. Ironically, it's never happened for Andy Reid. And he's had so many opportunities with the Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think he's going to the Hall of Fame even if he doesn't win a Super Bowl. But you've seen it for Doug Peterson, who's obviously off his coaching tree. Same type of situation. If you're in it, if you have a top 5 roster, if you stay healthy, healthy enough at least, you have a chance. And maybe the dice rolls your way. Sometimes it's not, though, and that's the point. And I hate to use the term luck because people work so hard, but luck is a big part of it.
You do need, yeah, absolutely. You need, to stay healthy. I mean, because that's a big thing. And by the way, the team that won the Super Bowl, the Eagles, they had a lot of injuries. Who knows if they, God forbid, if they stayed healthy the whole time, whether the starting crew would have won the Super Bowl.
Well, yeah, we talked about that with Carson and Nick Foles. I mean, look, there's no question Carson was going to be the MVP that year if he doesn't get hurt in December. And you say that, and he's the better player, and there's a reason the Eagles paid him $108 million. But you can also say the two things aren't mutually exclusive. Nick Foles got hot at the right time. It's very, very unlikely that Carson Wentz, as great as he was that season, was going to play as well against the Vikings and Patriots as Nick Foles did. He just got hot.
Yeah.
So I've always compared it to Vinnie Johnson, the old Detroit Pistons 6-man, lighting somebody up for 40, and then maybe down the road, you'd rather have, if you ask people, would you rather have Isaiah Thomas or Vinnie Johnson? Well, everybody's going to take Isaiah Thomas, but for one particular day, if Vinny's top, there was nobody better.
Right.
And that's sort of what Nick Foles did in both the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl.
John McMullen at JF McMullen. 1 week in, has any of the camp battles kind of materialized or heaten up? I mean, when you look at where we are a week, what are some of the things that we've learned or things that we are, that are kind of heating up?
Well, I think the most obvious one that was kind of open, because there aren't a lot of open jobs on this team. There really aren't. Everything is pretty straightforward. But I think of the open jobs, you look at the defensive side of the ball, you look at that second linebacker spot. When Nigel Bradham does come back, who's going to play next to him? And Camus Grugier-Hill has kind of, I think, distanced himself to be that guy, at least at the start. And then you talk about cornerback without Ronald Darby and Jalen Mills, and it's been interesting because everybody's played well. Sidney Jones has played well. Rasul Douglas has played well. Avante Maddox has played well. So that was one of those silver lining things Jim Schwartz talked about. After getting your starting corners injured last year, guys were forced to play, and now the Eagles are kind of reaping the rewards because these guys are more prepared to play.
Yeah, and I know there's some interesting names. You brought up Agadosi yesterday. There's guys that are going to be interesting stories who just aren't going to make this team.
No, and we talk about the depth, and receiver is one of those positions. There's a lot of receivers on this team, and there's really no open spots. You could argue if you believe in Mac Hollins, and I think this team still does, none of these guys have a shot. The Greg Wards and the Markin Michels and the Carlton Agudosis. Now, there'll be slots on the practice squad. They could still be around, but as far as being on the 53-man roster, we just talked about Pro Football Focus saying they have the best receiving corps in the NFL. Think about that, from where this team was. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden it's Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson, Nelson Aguilar, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside.
Right.
There's not room for camp guys who've excelled. And Greg Ward has been great. But how do you get him on this roster?
Right, and it's not like you could be Greg Ward and beat out Arcega-Whiteside. You're not beating him for a roster spot.
No. And, he would be beating out Mac Hollins. I mean, Arcega-Whiteside is a high-level prospect, and he's living up to the billing. So I always talk about teams defaulting to draft picks. In his case, that's not the case because he deserves his spot. But defensive end, we've talked about Joe Osman a lot. He's flat out outplayed Sharif Miller. Are the Eagles going to reward that? Who knows?
And Osman's a guy, they didn't draft him, but he was an undrafted guy. But, I mean, at least he's part of this regime. I mean, so he might have a small shot to not – I guess Miller being a draft choice, do they think they can sneak him on the practice squad would be the question.
Yeah, I mean – And
what about Sweat? Is he a shoo-in?
Yeah, Sweat's a shoo-in. He's kind of distanced himself, and they like his potential as a pass rusher. Mm-hmm. And he's one of the reasons why they felt comfortable in moving Michael Bennett and going in a different direction away from Chris Long because they did like his potential. Malik Jackson's a big part of that as an inside rusher as well. But as far as Osman goes, in the modern NFL, I mean, you just don't cut fourth-round picks. They got to be really bad for teams to cut fourth-round picks. And it's probably not, to be honest, that's not the way you should go about it. But that's just the way the NFL has gone, the direction the league has gone. And if you think about GMs and their job, I mean, they have – their jobs depend on their draft picks. So it's understandable in most cities why teams always give the draft choices the benefit of the doubt. The Eagles have a little bit more rope, having just won a Super Bowl, having such a good team, Howie Roseman has enough rope to say, you know what, Joe's better. Let's keep Joe. Let's try to get Sharif through waivers. It's probably not going to happen. But I don't think they're going to do it. I really don't. There's other avenues. If somebody gets hurt, even if it's not serious, you could put them on injured reserve.
Yeah.
Do a redshirt year that way, but that's more difficult. The NFL's tightened up on those rules. Back in the old days, the Washington Redskins, when Joe Gibbs was there, were famous for it. They would stash 6-7 guys on injured reserve that they liked. You can't really do that anymore. You have to prove injuries. So it's a little bit more difficult. But at some point, you would like to give a signal to the roster and say, everybody knows. I mean, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, they know Joe's a better player. So at some point, you might want to say, look, we're going to reward the guy. And that's how I think they should look at it, but I don't know necessarily if that's the way they are going to look at it.
Hey, by the way, so I'm looking through our analytics today at stories on our website and what stories are doing well and what stories are, and your story on Carlton Agadosi is the top story of the day so far. And then I see this story, why are the Eagles kicking the tires on Jonathan Cyprien? And I'm going through, I said, I don't see that story anywhere. So I, went and searched the website. It's a story that you wrote back in June on the Eagles kicking the tires on Jonathan Cyprien. That is way up the list today as some of our top stories read. So they kicked the tires on him back in June, which I did not remember.
Yeah, they worked him out in June. And remember, he's coming off a torn ACL, so he wasn't necessarily ready to do anything at that point anyway. And he visited a number of other teams. Also, remember, Malcolm was staying away from voluntary work, so that was part of the mix as well. And he's more of a box safety, which is Malcolm's role, not nearly as versatile as Malcolm, but a lot of that played into it. And now here it is. He's ready to go. The Eagles, that's why you work out people. You make files on them. And if they're available and you need somebody and you feel they can help you. And this is another clear indication that not that you needed it, but this team believes it's a contender.
Yeah.
Because you're not bringing in people like Jonathan Cyprien and Orlando Scandrick, for that matter, if you don't think you're on the cusp of winning a Super Bowl.
All right. John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, and, of course, football at 4 every day here. Did you watch any of the game last night?
Yeah, I was telling Josh I had it on for the entire game. I think I watched 5 minutes.
Now,
it's tough to get through.
Yeah, forget the game. You had the big play, which was the challenge of the pass interference. And if that's the way it's going to be, I think this is going to be an ugly thing.
Yeah,
experiment.
I've said that from day one. It's ugly. You don't change rules, and I said this same thing with the Aaron Rodgers rule. When he got hurt and knocked to the ground, and that started all that roughing the quarterback nonsense, and they ramped that up. When you change rules over one play, that's just dumb. You chalk it up to human error. The guy made a mistake. It's tough. I get it for the New Orleans Saints. But, it's been going on for years. It's been going on as long as they've been playing football.
Yep.
There's human error.
All right, man. Tomorrow morning, you'll hear John with Pete Thompson on the Pete Thompson Show. And the Eagles get ready. What's that, right before they hit the field, right?
Yeah. I think I'm on 8:20 with Pete. I think practice is at 9:05.
Football at 8. We'll do it. 8:20. That's what we'll call it.
Breakfast with the PT.
There you
973,
go. Yes, and we got the PT Power Hour coming up tonight at 5. He's John McMullen at JF McMullen. Give him a follow and check out all his Eagles camp coverage at 97.3 ESPN.com. Have a good weekend, pal.
All right, you too, Mike.